You know that feeling, that deep, sometimes almost painful longing for how simple things used to be when we were kids? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into in today's Explainer. We're looking at a truly universal emotion through the lens of the English poet Thomas Hood. If you've ever found yourself wishing life was just a bit easier, like it was back in the day, you're going to connect with this instantly. We're going to completely unpack his most famous poem, I Remember, to see exactly how he constructed such a heartbreaking masterpiece. Now, to really grasp the weight of what we're about to read, we kind of need to set the stage with who Thomas Hood actually was. Listen to what the renowned critic William Michael Rossetti said about him in 1903. He called Hood the finest English poet between the generations of Shelley and Tennyson. I mean, that is absolutely massive praise, right? It places him squarely in the heart of the 19th century literary elite. And he wasn't just a poet. The guy was a humorist, a brilliant author, and a regular contributor from major publications like the London Magazine, Athenaeum, and Punch. But, as you'll see, to understand his greatest poem, we really have to look at the man behind the pen. So, his life actually took a really difficult turn, and incredibly quickly. Born in London in 1799, he had this brief, normal window of childhood. He had a great private school master in Islington who made learning super fascinating, and he even made a little money revising a novel. But then, his father died, and everything just flipped. At just 14 years old, an age when kids today are literally just starting high school, he was pushed out of his youth and directly into the harsh, demanding world of adult labor in a counting house. And that early hardship, it took a massive toll. It eventually led to permanent invalidism by the time he was 41, and tragically, he passed away at only 45. Let's zoom in a bit on those working years, because being forced into professions he hated totally shaped his fate. That counting house job at 14, it was brutal. Hood actually tried to use humor to cope at first. He joked that he turned his stool into a Pegasus on 3 legs, but the reality was grim, and the work completely wrecked his health. He tried to pivot, studying engraving instead, but it turned out the physical labor of engraving was absolutely no better for his body. Even though he had a brief stint in Scotland later where he got some fresh air and started writing poetry seriously, the damage from those early years was pretty much locked in. He was never a robust guy, and it all culminated in him being permanently bedridden. Okay, so keeping that dark background of sickness and forced labor in mind gives us some absolutely devastating context for his masterpiece, I Remember. It was first published in 1844. That is just one single year before his premature death at age 45. Think about that for a second. When we read this poem, we aren't just reading pretty words. We are reading the literal thoughts of a dying man in his mid-40s whose body has completely broken down, looking back at that tiny, shining window of his youth before the counting house took it all away. The genius here is that the entire poem is built on juxtaposition. The core theme acts like a pendulum, swinging back and forth between the bright light of a perfect childhood and this gloomy, highly uncertain adulthood. Every single stanza plays a part in this pendulum swing. He addresses it head-on, perfectly capturing that universal ache when you realize time just passes by, leaving absolutely nothing but memories in its wake. So let's dive into the text and see exactly how he pulls this off. Look at how he builds this right out of the gate in the first stanza. He starts with this super warm, welcoming memory of his childhood home and the little window where the sun came peeping in at morn. He remembers that the sun never came a wink too soon, never brought too long a day. It's cozy, it's safe, it's perfect. But then bam, we get this violent adult contrast. But now I often wish the night had borne my breath away. The bright morning sun of his youth instantly crashes into his dark adult desire for the night to simply end his suffering. Talk about a phenomenal, heartbreaking opening. Moving into the second stanza, Hood kind of tries to escape those dark thoughts by retreating into nature. He recalls the vivid flowers of his youth, red and white roses, violets, and lily cups that he actually calls flowers made of light. It's incredibly visual. But the detail that really hits hard is the laburnum tree that his brother planted on his birthday. Hood notes, the tree is living yet. It's such a profound realization. The nature planted in his youth, the very garden of his childhood, endures with all this vibrant vitality, while his own failing adult body completely lacks it. And here is where he so brilliantly weaves his grim real life right into the verse. He remembers being a boy on a swing, feeling the air rush by as fresh as swallows on the wing. He writes, "My spirit flew in feathers then. Total weightlessness, complete freedom. But that freedom is instantly crushed by his present reality. He says, that is so heavy now. And why is it heavy? He tells us, because of the literal heavy fever on my brow.
His past weightlessness is slammed right up against the chronic physical fever of his adulthood. A fever so intense, he says even summer pools could hardly cool it down. Now, as we move toward the end of the piece, the physical pain and exhaustion we just talked about morphs into something else. It gives way to a profound philosophical loss. The poem completely transitions away from the physical environment, the sun, the flowers, the swings, the literal fever, and moves into something entirely internal. It becomes a spiritual reflection. Let's break down that final transition. Stanza 4 is essentially a battle between childhood ignorance and adult wisdom. As a kid, he used to look up at the dark, high fir trees and think their slender tops were close against the sky. He admits right there in the text that this was just childish ignorance. But the devastating truth? Knowing reality actually brings him little joy. The hard-earned wisdom of adulthood, all those harsh realities he learned from age 14 onward, gave him absolutely nothing to replace the magical wonder he felt when he honestly thought a tree could touch the sky.
Which brings us to the devastating final lines, and the big question I want to leave you with today. Hood concludes that his adult reality brings him little joy, to know I'm farther off from heaven than when I was a boy. I mean, really think about that. Does adult wisdom merely mean realizing we're just moving further and further away from our own little piece of heaven? Hood's brilliant use of contrast forces us to look at our own timeline. He makes us ask ourselves, is the heavy price of growing up, of gaining all this knowledge, actually worth the loss of that perfect, childish light? It is a haunting thought from a true master, and it perfectly captures why this 1844 masterpiece still resonates with us so deeply today.